Rowe.
Thank you, Mr President. And I'm delighted to rise to speak in support of this motion today and thank the member for Windermere for bringing it forward for us to contemplate and discuss. Along with the entire nation, Mr President, my family and I watched spellbound every Matildas game throughout the recent World Cup, hosted for the first time here in our nation and region. This team of extraordinarily talented, hard-working women captivated the whole country and inspired our national pride to a degree that exceeded any previous sporting achievement or event, I believe. It's notable that the extent of the engagement and adulation that we all experienced took us, I think, by surprise, and that in itself is telling. We hadn't realised the whole country would erupt with a fierce passion, inspired by the sporting prowess of our world-class Matildas. This was an opportunity that we hadn't been provided with before this World Cup, but I believe that it's been a watershed moment. As acknowledged in this motion, it is inevitable that the exceptional achievements of the Matildas in the World Cup will have a significant impact right down to our local sport environment, especially football. And in this case, I mean soccer, and I'll continue to use football for that. In particular, it will be an inspiration that will increase participation in local football and drive motivation to excel amongst our young people and, in fact, our adults, Mr President. The electorate of Nelson is home to a number of fantastic football clubs, including the Kingborough Lions United Football Club, the University of Tasmania Football Club, Hobart City Beachside Football Club and the Taroona Football Club. And in preparing a contribution on this motion, I reached out to the Taroona Football Club, as it has a particular connection to the Matildas, and invited the club to provide some reflections on the impact of the Matildas' performance at the World Cup. I'm happy to be able to share their response here today, and particularly I'd thank Karen Wills and Sheila Curtin for organising to provide this reflection. So if I may, Mr President, I'll just read the short statement, which includes some wonderful quotes from the Taroona Football Club folk. This is what they said. The recent Women's World Cup held across Australia and New Zealand has certainly lifted the profile of women's football across Australia and the rest of the world. With a game attendance of almost 2 million people across the two host nations and the millions who watch the games on their screens across the world, interest in the women's game has certainly exceeded expectations prior to the event. Throughout this tournament, the world was watching Australia to see just what we could offer the world in this space, and the Matildas have presented as great role models, showing us what can be achieved for players of all ages. Taroona Football Club has had a steady stream of contact from new players wanting to join at junior, youth and senior levels during and since the World Cup. Some for the first time and some who are wanting to put the boots back on after a break. We are hoping that this momentum will continue and that, as well as growing participation in the game, we can also build a healthy environment for our players and their well-being. Taroona Football Club's Skills Program Manager and Head of Youth Development, Holly Lace-Ayton, also works for the Matildas as their Technical Director.
Through you, Mr President. Holly Ayton's my cousin.
Hey, it's Tassie. Holly Lace's passion and enthusiasm for the game is contagious around the club, as is her positive attitude towards the women's game. This is a quote from Holly. 10 years ago, I dreamt about having a job in football and in dedicating a lot of time and taking opportunities presented to me. I was honoured to be representing Australia and Tasmania by working with the Matildas at the World Cup. Reflecting now, it feels very surreal. For someone who can experience both the epitome of women's football in the world and then weeks later be back home at the Taroona Football Club and visiting Burnie Football Club, seeing how the World Cup has captured the whole community, even here in Tasmania, is incredible. To hear our young female footballers speaking about women's sport in such a strong and powerful way is truly inspirational. This is a game changer, said Holly. And the statement from Taroona Football Club goes on to say, 13-year-old Evie O'Neill, who currently plays in the under-14 mixed competition, the under-16 girls competition, and coaches a junior team at Taroona, was lucky enough to get tickets to the Matildas versus Denmark game. Evie said, I've been playing soccer for as long as I can remember, and seeing more and more girls start to play is amazing. I think you have to give the most credit to the Matildas. When I coach younger players, they all say they want to be a Matilda, and when team names are required for games, it's always the Matildas. Going to the game was a dream come true, and the fact that there are the most amazing role models that close to you is impossible to put into words. Seeing all of the support for the team and the roar when Caitlin Ford scored was the loudest thing I've ever heard. I've been to a lot of sports games and concerts and it's never been that loud. Seeing the support for the green and gold is rewarding for everyone involved because what they've done now is a part of Australia's history. And to know that I got to witness that makes me so grateful. Go Matildas! Tasmania has so far had 4 senior female national representatives over the years: Yolanda McCarthy, Yvonne Mitchell in 1987, and Lisa Radar and Zoe Nolan. We look forward to seeing further investment in the sport to help ensure many more young players from the state realise their aspirations and play for our country. Holly Lace said, "We have fought for this moment for so many years, and I think it's safe to say that it has exceeded all our expectations. A home World Cup that has reignited the light in so many of us. We now need to use it to drive social change for women and girls and their opportunities here in Tasmania and across the country. We now know that anything really is possible." Mr. President, I think that was a great statement from Taroona Football Club, and wonderful to hear the direct voices of Holly Lace and also of Evie, a young girl who's lived through this moment and it's made such an impact. I want to reiterate my thanks to Taroona Football Club in the Nelson electorate for providing those reflections. I think it's so valuable to have that direct voice as we commenting here about things that can seem theoretical, even though the impact flows right down to the most grassroots in this sport and other sports. Mr. President, I'm a football parent of long standing, and I'll make a few more reflections of my own on the impact of the Matildas World Cup performance as outlined in the motion. The first thing I reflect on is actually one of the most impactful parts of the whole experience across the weeks of the World Cup was watching the 6-episode documentary on the Matildas that was aired at the similar time. And I watched it with my teenage son, who himself wants to be a professional sports person, and it was a really huge experience for us, actually, and made the whole World Cup experience so much richer. The backstory presented in that documentary, showing the growth and the planning across the last 3 years towards this World Cup. It showed the highs and the lows of the players. It showed the injuries, including Hayley Rasso's broken back, Ellie Carpenter's ACL surgery, all the highlights and the lowlights that these women experienced on their pathway to this World Cup. It showed the sheer grit and determination of these women who did not have an easy path laid out for them, who had to fight and work and sacrifice to get to where they are today, who had to move countries, move cities, move states for greater opportunities, had to do the hard yards as young players, working to be on representative sides, selling chocolates door to door to fund themselves to get there. Girls who got kicked out of other boys-only sports that they wanted to pursue but weren't allowed to, and by default ended up in football. Thank goodness Sam Kerr is one of those. The women in this team who balance motherhood alongside being an elite sports person. All of this shown in those documentaries was extraordinary and brought such a richness then to watching the games across the time of the World Cup. And I could see how impactful that was to understand that path to this competition, to help fully understand the magnitude of the achievements that we were seeing played out in the 90-odd minutes on screen. And watching the documentary series and engaging with other commentary alongside watching the games as the World Cup progressed, Mr. President, prompted me to reflect on a few key issues that epitomise the inequality and the barriers that were faced by these elite female athletes and the degree to which this World Cup has turned those issues on their heads. And in causing that disruption, we can see progress made. but we're not out of the woods yet, so reflection is important. One of those issues that I would like to reflect on briefly is pay disparity. Well, women's football has come a long way since Australia qualified for the first Women's World Cup. That was in 1995. Back then, FIFA offered women no prize money at all. None. At that time, the Matildas, who made history as Australia's first representatives, could barely afford the privilege of playing for their country. Most of them returned home to part-time jobs, struggling to make ends meet to be able to play and continue playing the game that they loved at an elite level. From no prize money in 1995, improvement in prize money for women at the World Cup was slow. Total prize money in 2007 was $5.8 million for the whole event. In 2011, $7.5 million. This is US dollars, I should say. In 2015, US $15 million in prize money for the Women's World Cup. In 2019, FIFA had triumphantly announced that as part of their commitment to gender equality, they were doubling the prize money for women playing in the World Cup in France in 2019, doubling from 2015 to $30 million US. Sounds great, Mr. President, but what FIFA didn't say and trumpet at that time was that still only amounted to 7.5% of what the men were being paid for their World Cup the year before. And actually, that increase delivered an increase in the gap between men and women's prize money because the men's increased more. The FIFA Council had no justification for why they were actually increasing the gap in pay, just trumpeted the raw increase in women's prize money. So what that meant was that for the US women's team who won that 2019 World Cup, they received just 10.5% of what the men got for winning the year before, and only 50% of what the US men's team received for merely qualifying to go to the World Cup. The same year, 2019, there were still Matildas playing for us who could not afford to represent Australia and therefore didn't go. So fast forward to 2023, this year, more progress, excellent. The direct prize money on offer was 3 times more than that in 2019, 6 times more than 2015. It was $110 million US. And Australia stepped up and delivered equality of pay for the Matildas as national team members, so the pay they received to be on the team from Australia. For the first time, the Matildas received the same pay as their male counterparts from Australia as national team members. But it's still the prize money that drives the inequality, because despite the threefold increase on 2019 prize money, for their stellar performance this year in 2023, the Matildas will take home only a quarter of what the Socceroos and other men's teams were paid in the Men's World Cup, because the prize money is still only a third or so the prize money of the men's comp just last year. And I think, Mr. President, it's clear that by awarding women significantly less prize money than men, FIFA is exacerbating the existing differential impacts on women and undermining their ability to participate in this sport, and that's a shame. But on the positive side, there is a plan to bring equality over the next 4 years, and I would say the outstanding success and commercial success of the 2023 Women's World Cup would provide them with absolutely no excuse for falling short when we look ahead to the 2026 and 27 World Cups and look for an improvement in fact, a delivery of equality at that time. Mr. President, another issue that occurred to me as I was engaging with the World Cup, watching the games, watching the documentary, reading the commentary, another issue that I think epitomises some of that inequality and the barriers faced by elite female athletes, including the Matildas, is viewership. It was also an issue, I think, that got blown out of the water with this World Cup, where, as noted by the member for Windermere in his contribution, each Matildas game was watched by more than the last and broke record after record for viewership. And I contrast that with the situation when we look back, not that far. And I recall some descriptions by Ellie Carpenter, currently one of our wonderful Matildas. She plays on the right in defence, wonderful woman, also for Lyon in France, outstanding defender. Started representing this nation when she was 16, and she talks about going to watch the Matildas play when she was 12, and there were 300 people watching. A national team, 300 people watching, and not long after that, In 2014, not that long ago, the Matildas were playing here in this country, and they were playing against the absolute football giants, Brazil. Brazil had come here to play 2 games against our Matildas, and they played it at the Queensland Sport and Athletics Centre. And unlike what we've just experienced this year, tickets for those 2 matches against Brazil in 2014 couldn't even be given away. The first match attracted a crowd of just over 2,500 fans. And so the second match, because of that, saw them actually shut the stadium and have no spectators whatsoever because it was too expensive to open to only a handful of spectators. And this is not ancient history that we're talking about, it's only 8 years ago. In fact, 7 of those players from 2014 in that empty stadium are still on the Matildas squad now and were some of our outstanding performers in this World Cup. Claire Polkinghorne, Steph Catley, Emily Van Egmond, Alana Kennedy, Hayley Rasso, Mackenzie Arnold and Katrina Gorry. We all cheered for them. We all were enraptured by them, watching our TVs, watching our streaming services. What changed since 2014, Mr. President? It's not the fact that they weren't outstanding sportswomen then as they are now. It's that there has been a hell of a lot more done to support and to bring to the forefront these incredibly talented women. What must it be like for them, for those 7, to have experienced this progress, to see from the time only 8 years ago that they had to play to an empty stadium to now see what they can mean to us as a country, when they and their sport are provided with even a small approximation of what men have been provided with for decades in terms of support, investment and putting them out there into the public domain as elite sports people. We were always told...
Mackenzie Arnold front up when she missed that penalty in the game and then front up back in the goals to defend. It was just the most amazing.
Epitome of composure, that woman. Epitome of composure.
Have the crowd there would have been extraordinary for it.
Mr. President, we were also we've been told for decades that people wouldn't watch women's elite sport because women's sport is boring, it's less skillful, it's worth less than the men's game, it's not commercially viable. These are things that have been repeated many times over. If there's one thing that this World Cup has taught the world is that if you give women's sport a platform, the audience will come. The FIFA World Cup in 2023 was the biggest global sporting event of the year, the most attended standalone women's sporting event in history, and a true celebration of women's sport.
It wasn't boring, it was heart-stopping.
100%.
Boring. That French game.
My God. As a member for Windermere mentioned, I think we would all agree that Optus got the deal of the century where the peanuts are paid for the broadcast rights, and I doubt those rights will go for quite such a song next time around, quite rightly.
Guaranteed that's the case.
Mr. President, one further issue I want to mention that I think also epitomises that inequality and the barriers that are faced by elite female athletes is the downplaying of women's prowess and achievements. Only last year, Sam Kerr surpassed Tim Cahill's goal-scoring record for Australia. And at the time was told by another former Socceroo, Robbie Slater, that comparisons between the 2 greats was disrespectful to Cahill. Robbie Slater went on to write, "Don't get me wrong, Sam Kerr is a fantastic player and I'm delighted that she has now scored 54 times for Australia. Yes, she has scored more goals for the Matildas than any other player in history, but Tim Cahill was a Socceroo, not a Matilda. His 50 goals for the Socceroos is a record that shouldn't be overshadowed by Kerr's achievements."
Can't bear the thought.
Mr. President, I'd say that distasteful, sexist piece of commentary has aged pretty damn badly in the last couple of months. And I'd like to hope that we will never see the like of it again. Because quite simply there is no need, and it is in fact ridiculous to suggest that there is less merit in the achievements of an elite athlete based on their gender. We do not need to denigrate one beneath the other. We can celebrate the achievements of both equally and recognise greatness wherever it lies. So, Mr. President, in conclusion, they say you can't be what you can't see, but the outstanding women in the Matildas squad launched themselves into the stratosphere where no one had gone before them. They took the Matildas and Australia into uncharted territory of achievement. They forged paths of international glory never before achieved by Australian footballers, male or female. Through utter determination, strength, hard work, and outstanding skill and talent, they forged a dream, and they shared it with all of us. For 3 glorious weeks, we were them and they were us. For the first time ever, an Australian female sports team was the pinnacle and epitome of our collective national spirit and pride. The effect of that is, and will continue to be, profound, I think, for all Australians, but especially for girls and young women who've witnessed it. Australian boys and young men have always been fortunate to grow up saturated in a culture that venerates elite male athletes. But because of the achievements of the Matildas at this year's World Cup, young girls in Australia have had the opportunity to experience that same joy and have seen what they can now dream to be. Mr. President, the legacy of this moment can and should be nation-changing.